In the following video, we're going to practice factoring out the difference of two squares. Now, the formula for this, the process for this, is that if you have two terms and those terms are perfect squares, a squared, b squared, and difference meaning subtraction. So if you're taking the difference of two squares, it factors into the square root of the first term plus the square root of the second term and square root of the first term minus the square root of the second term. So you notice, I have something squared minus something squared, a squared minus b squared. You get a plus b, a minus b. You have the same terms. It's just one's a plus sign and one's a minus sign. The reason why this works is because if you were to actually FOIL this out, you would get a squared minus ab plus ab, ba is ab, and then minus b squared. And AB minus AB, the outside and inside cancel, and you get A squared minus B squared. And so when you're factoring the difference of squares, if you notice that you have two terms and there's no GCF, you're going to check to see are these two terms perfect squares? And if so, you can apply the difference of two squares technique. Now, the key is this, and this is why a lot of students struggle with the difference of two squares, is you should really have memorized what the first 15 perfect squares are. You should know what 1 squared is. Well, of course you should. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. And you should know all of those all the way up to, if I have 12 squared, you should know that 144 is 12 squared. You should know that 169 is 13 squared. You should know that 196 is 14 squared. You should know that 225 is 15 squared. Those should be already in your mind, and if not, then you really should spend time, I want to say, memorizing them. Because if I tell you and I say the number, if I just throw out a random number and let's say that's 64, and I ask, what's special about 64? Well, you should know that 64 is a perfect square of 8. And so make sure you know many of your perfect squares before you move on to applying this concept. It's going to make things a lot easier for it. So let's try some of these. I have 25x squared minus 16. There is no GCF there. So I see two terms, and I notice that my 25 and x squared are both perfect squares. The square root of 25 is 5, and so you get 5x and 5x. I notice that 16 is a perfect square. The square root of 16 is 4, so you get 5x plus 4 and 5x minus 4. And that is the factor of 25x squared minus 16. Same thing goes with number 2, 64y squared and 25. There is no GCF. I see they're perfect squares, so I'm going to try my difference of squares technique. So I'm going to take the square root of the first term. Square root of 64 is 8. Square root of y squared is 8y. So you have 8y as your first term in both parentheses. And then you're going to take the square root of the second term. And so I have square root of 25 is 5. So I'm going to put a positive 5 and a minus 5. So plus 5, minus 5. So the factor of 64y squared minus 25 is 8y plus 5, 8y minus 5. Let's last try 4t squared minus 9. There's no GCF between the two terms, so I can't use that technique. So if I examine my two terms, I can see that 4t squared is a perfect square. The square root of 4t squared is 2t. So you're going to have a 2t as the first term in both parentheses. And then I examine the second term. That as well is a perfect square of 9. So you're going to take the square root of it and get a plus sign and a minus sign. So the square root of 9, you're going to have a plus 3. And you're going to have a minus 3. And so the factors of 4t squared minus 9 is 2t plus 3 and 2t minus 3. You're going to have the same numbers inside the parentheses, 8y and 5, 8y and 5, 5x and 4, 5x and 4. The only difference is your operations is one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. Again, the key is make sure you know your perfect squares. So that way when I recognize a number, like I said 64, I can tell right off the bat that's a perfect square. If I were to put 144 down, you should know that's a perfect square. So practice working on your perfect squares 1 through 15 and practice applying this concept as well with the factoring the difference, meaning subtraction, of two perfect squares.